Good evening. It's an honor for me to be here and watching with you ISIS Tomorrow, this documentary I've worked on in the last year and a half, from October 2016, the beginning of Mosul offensive, till last May 2018. This documentary is on ISIS children, the sons of ISIS fighter, and the wives of ISIS fighter, but this documentary is also a confession of failure. While we were covering Mosul offensive, we have met this boy, Aboudi, which is the one who opens the documentary. He's 12 years old. His mother was beaten by Al-Qansa in the square in front of everybody. His father was threatened. And while we were talking with him, he just told us, I will be happy only after revenge. And while we were talking with this boy, I asked to the Iraqi guys who were working with me and Alessio, the co-director, and I asked them, how do you think to cope during the war and after the war, the problem of the sons of ISIS father? And they were gentle guys, sensitive, educated, replied, we will try to kill as ISIS relative as possible. What else we can do? And this sentence was not just a brutal one, it was a reproach. Because they were telling me, you are a Western journalist with your luggage of clichés and stereotypes, and you are here, but you have already lived what we are living. And I had a strong sense of circularity of history, we seem to have not learned. And in that moment, we decided that the narrative we were working on had failed definitely, and that we had the duty to sit close and in front of the guilty and trying to humanize them, which is the only solution, not to repeat the same mistakes of the past. And sitting in front of the guilty, listening them, was a learning experience to me. And this is the product of that experience. Thank you very much.
Francesca, thank you for making this astonishing movie. It speaks to me very personally because I spent nearly 6 years of my life in Iraq and a lot of that time in Mosul. The most astonishing thing was the access you were able to get, not just physical access to the wives and children of former ISIS fighters, but to get access to their thoughts, their innermost thoughts, and to have them speak out so candidly to you. Can you talk us through a little bit about how you managed to do that, whether it was easy, whether they came up and spoke freely, or whether you had to struggle to get them to come out?
I want to start with the last interview, Noor. Noor is a 16-year-old girl. She is an orphan and a widow of an ISIS fighter, of two ISIS fighters. And it took almost 1 year to convince her to give this interview. We have met for the first time in Al-Jada camp. She was trying to prevent her mother to talk with me. Said, Haram, you cannot talk with her. And she didn't want to look at me. She didn't want to show her face. She didn't want to drink tea with me. And she was talking with the mother, and finally, that day, she just wanted to share with me the days of her. She wanted me to see her wedding pictures. And she showed me this picture, and she has not the head in the picture, because it was a ram. And I realized in that moment that Noor, for me, represented the future of ideology. because she was not just proud to be a widow, but proud to have the chance to be the mother of a new martyr, which I think is a sort of an upgrade in her way to show me how proud she was of having the chance to be the bride of an ISIS fighter. And once she told me, I did want a son, to give him a good education, because we raised like that. We believe in that. We believe in that. Since the beginning, she doesn't mention ISIS or Al-Qaeda in Iraq. We believe in that. That's it, since the beginning. And after that, I came several months later without camera, just to spend time with her inside the rehabilitation camps. And she didn't want to, she didn't want to be recorded, this voice, the voice. And 6 months later, so this May, she called me and she told me we are back in Al Tanak neighborhood, which is one of the more problematic neighborhoods, together with Wadi Ajar. They are the outskirts of Mosul. And she told me, you can spend 2, 3, 4 days with me. And I stayed there, building the trust and confidence, step by step. And the day after our interview, the day we left, it happened that Iraqi intelligence went right in Beit Daesh. This is the house of an ISIS family in front of their houses. So this is the kind of situation, retaliation that ISIS families are living on a daily basis. But Noor, for me, was the most important interview, more than Mahmoud, if possible, because she, I strongly believe that when she say, I'm proud of my father, and I think she tells the most important sentence in all the documentary, we are like men, and they know it.
Yes.
We are like men. I always say this provocative sentence, and often someone criticizes me for that, but I strongly believe they are becoming the recruiter of their children. I don't know if unwillingly or not, but they live in this emptiness we have seen, without access to school, without access to food aid, just being threatened by the neighbors, just being treated sometimes by the Mukhtar, the responsible of the community. They have to hide themselves. They suffer sexual harassment. And so they are raising this generation of children with the idea that they have to emulate their fathers. Because it's the only solution. And one thing that really struck me, talking with this woman always, is that they seem to have learned something we don't want to learn, which is the idea of circularity of the events.
You mentioned that before the movie started when you were talking about it. Explain that a little bit. What do you mean by circularity of events?
You mean that when you ask to these women about the recruitment of their husband, the majority of them started talking about 2003 and they mentioned Kambuka in a way or another. And one of these women, when I asked about the recruitment of her husband, she told me, my husband was a driver. One nighttime in 2009, American troops arrived and beaten him in front of our children, put a plastic handcuff. He was blindfolded. He stayed in prison for 2 years. And we discovered just because of a neighbor wanted to revenge of something, and he told to the intelligence, to the Mukhabarat, that there was a rocket deposit nearby their house, And they arrested randomly people in the neighborhood, and he stayed 2 years in Kambuka. After that, he joined ISIS. We were in 2011, and when I asked a Mosul boy about the mistakes of Western governments in Iraq, he told me it was not 2003, it was 2011. When you left,
right.
Not when you arrived. And when these women talk about Kambuka or the prison, they know that prison and open-air prison like the camp or the neighborhood like Al-Tanak or Wadi Ajar are a shelter for the ideology.
So they think that this is the second Kambuka. They are... Yeah.
That their neighbor are Kambuka number 2, we were talking this morning. And they realize, I think better than us, that these prisons are a shelter. Everything around is moving, is changing, and the ideology is there, lasting and expanding. And they know that. And when they say, now is like that, but tomorrow will change, they are saying, we already lived this situation. It was 2003, it was 2010. You thought we were stopped, but we are here. And now we are in a low tide moment. But we know that tomorrow will be our turn again.
You mentioned that you met Noor at a rehabilitation camp.
Yeah.
We don't really get to see that in the film. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of rehabilitation, if any, you saw in these camps?
Any. They have no access. There are some schools open in the refugees camp, the rehabilitation camp, and the 1 year ticket is worse than this one. And this is on there is only a section in Al-Jada camp with ISIS family. The ticket one is just for ISIS family, as far as I know for now. And I didn't see any rehabilitation program. The only rehabilitation program I've seen in this last 2 years in Iraq was in Kurdistan, in Erbil prison, where, to be honest, there are different programs, different attitude to ISIS children and teenagers. Mahmoud, after our interview, was moved to Baghdad, despite his amputation and its evident problem and need to be re-educated. He was moved to Baghdad and by the guy of the intelligence, the interview, because he thought it was too dangerous to let him stay in the safe house where I interview him. And there are, I don't know, hundreds, thousands underage. And when you realize that they are underage, that they are 15, 16, you also realize they are born after 2003. Yes, all of them. And all of them have only memories about war, vengeance, retaliation, revenge, and that's it.
What is, so when they go back from the camp into their homes, with the signs outside saying, this is the house of Daesh, what is stopping the neighbors from doing worse than just taunting them? What is stopping the neighbors from beating them up or worse, killing them? Because there is a sense of vengeance on that side too.
Yes, sometimes they are forced to leave the neighborhood and they move. Some of the families I've met in this month, they move to Awija. And
they can travel?
Not easily, but in a way, Iraqi government seems to prefer to create other ghettos. So they are living in neighborhoods where the majority of them, again, are the family of the...
And that's a government program, that's not just they clinging to each other for support and security.
It's not a program, it's something that is randomly happening at the moment, yeah. For what I know, for what I've seen on my personal experience. And I've met another guy, Ibrahim. He was from Mosul. Unfortunately, the interview was not edited in the documentary. He was an English teacher in Mosul before 2014. And he lived under ISIS occupation. After his neighborhood was liberated, he started for his English skill to collaborate with the Iraqi army and international humanitarian organization to reunite the children found in the front line with the families. And he told me that at the beginning, aunt, grandparents, or long-distant relatives were taking care of these children. After a while, they call him back, saying, our community don't want them back, because tribal laws are stronger than state laws. And so they returned the children. They didn't want the custody. And they faced, categorical refusal from the family, and so these children know they are survivors among their relatives, but they have to stay in the orphanage or in Mosul or in Baghdad.
So that's interesting. Now, in many parts of the West, in the US, in Europe, and indeed on the stage, we've heard people talking about this, that there is a fear that many fighters and their families will just melt away into the population. But what you seem to be saying is that that's not so easy. Just because they're Iraqis, they speak the same language, they are carrying a sign. They're carrying a sign almost written on their head that this person came from ISIS.
And I think that this stigma that now is shameful for these children and for these women risks to become, if managed like that, a Medal of Honor in 5 years' time. The sign that, these children are the arsenal ISIS left behind.
Yes.
And and some of them have a complete awareness of not the message, but the responsibility their father left behind. When they talk with me about how their father were teaching the ideology, they say, between the lines, we know we are about to be defeated, but we are leaving you the idea of the caliphate, bringing to the future. And the epic theme of forgiveness, the question I asked to Ahmed,
yes,
I think it's something we have to work on. Because the relation between a father and a son in this kind of violence, it's something that we have to deal with. The capacity of forgiveness. They have to elaborate the violence they have been forced to socialize with. And in some way, they move the training camps, the military training camps, into reality. Today, the violence they had Youssef, which is the civilian one, against the ISIS sons, is their current violence on a daily basis. They are experiencing violence in another way.
Right.
In a verbal way, but it's more brutal sometimes than the military training.
The one voice that was missing, I felt, and I can understand why, but was the voice of official Iraq. We hear from some soldiers, and we hear from victims, and we hear from families, but we don't hear from officials. But I'm sure you interacted with officials who are responsible for these families. What was their attitude? Did you find any sense from these officials that they recognize, as you say, that this is the arsenal that ISIS left behind and we must do something about it?
We have 70 hours of footage for 1 hour and a half, and we decided not to talk about the sons of ISIS foreign fighter, not to be too close to the audience in Europe. We wanted to show the roots of the movement in Iraq. We didn't want to talk about Yazidis because another tragedy in the tragedy. And finally, we had this very powerful interview with General Jabouri, who stayed 7 years in United States, and then he went back for the offensive.
This is the commander of the Golden Brigade.
Yeah. And we stay in his base for a while during the war and after the war. And last time I have met him was in May, this May. And finally I asked him, General Jabouri, in front of the camera, so I have this interview, I'm quoting, what about the sons of the ISIS fighter? He replied, children are like dogs. They easily learn and they easily forget. This is the official vision of the army on the children.
They will forget by themselves. Okay, we are running close to the end of the time here, but I'll ask you one last question. Clearly, the story of Noor has moved you very personally. I assume you stay in touch with her some way. What is the best case scenario for what happens to Noor, given the circumstances? The worst case scenario we can imagine.
I don't think she will be able to return to school, and I think she will raise siblings, and I really hope she will not suffer of sexual harassment as her mother is suffering into that house. And to be honest, I'm very pessimistic on those families, so I will not surprise if in 10 years' time Noor will become a kamikaze, to be honest. Even less than 10 years' time. I mean, I think she's the perfect profile for this kind of choice. I hope not, of course.
Francesca, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, your director.